Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Crown and today we are going to have some more stories that I hope that you will enjoy. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now, without further ado, let's go! First story. Dude's cruise was a wrong cop. My dad. So one day, me and my dad are at the mall buying me some jeans. While heading towards the food court, I asked if we could stop at Auntie Anne's. It's the best pretzel place ever. While in line, some guy was complaining about how his food wasn't as he expected and asked for another one. The staff asked that he move over so that other customers could order. The guy says no and begins to light up a cigarette. So my dad, being a cop and all, walks up to him and asks him what's his issue. Keep in mind my dad is 5'7" and not that intimidating. The guy looks at my dad and says don't worry about it and go back in line. At that point my dad says, "Sir, are you aware that it is strictly prohibited to smoke on mall grounds?" And this guy blows smoke in my dad's face. Once more my dad asks him to put it out. And the guy looks at him and says, "What are you, a cop?" And then he laughs. So my dad goes to open his mouth to say something and the guy just shoves him. I'm just sitting there shocked and embarrassed at the same time. So my dad stands up and the guy goes to punch him again. Around that time my dad wraps his arms around his torso and tackles him to the ground. Within seconds he was in handcuffs. I just sat there shocked. My dad has been a cop for over 20 years. Since I'm only like 14, I have never seen him actually arrest someone. As my dad read him his rights and listed the charges while mall security was walking over, his charges were failure to abide by an officer's demand, assault on a peace officer, and disorderly conduct. I have never been so proud to be with my dad. Next story. A jerk tailgates me while I'm already speeding. So I set them up for a speed trap. I was driving home from a get-together. I was going 65 to 67 km per hour in a 60 zone. Where I'm from, the police almost never pull you over if you're going 10 or less over, but will definitely pull you over for anything over that. All was well until I got closer to my area. It is less city-like and more rural with the roads alternating between single and double lanes. I'm on a single lane speeding 10 when a pickup truck in my rear view caught my attention. They were going a tad bit faster when they caught up to me and promptly braked a meter behind me. I was like, okay, I'll speed up to 70, no big deal. But they continued to tailgate me. Upon closer inspection, I could see the mug of a very angry woman who had no understanding of personal space. What ensued was a full 5 minutes of them completely obscuring my rearview mirror with how close they were. I was tired and kind of hungover, so I really was not in the mood to be worrying about a potential car accident thanks to her driving. I was going to pull over and let her go round when Waze gave me a heads up that a police officer was reported up ahead. This was when I decided I am going dole out some karma. I slowly dropped my speed from 70 to 60. I am now at the speed limit. This woman was just furious. Why she just didn't pass me, I'll never know. But she was literally going slightly over the mid lane, yelling to herself in my rear view, flashing her full brights in a weird show-off-ish way to get me to go faster. I did this for another minute before Waze showed the cop was less than a kilometer away. I put on my turn signal, very slowly pulled over, and watched this woman flip me the bird as she whipped past me, disappearing over the hill, now going way faster than 10 kilometers per hour over. I continued on my way, getting up to 70 kilometers when I cleared the hill to see flashing lights ahead. Jackpot. I drove with anticipation until I got close enough to confirm it was my friend from earlier. Not wanting to miss out on hitting her with our new secret greeting, I dropped down to 60 km per hour, peered over, and flashed the bird back at her. I hope you enjoy the ticket, Karen. Next story. The time I ruined my high school teacher's career and got her fired in the greatest way possible. Backstory. I was a senior in high school at the time and I had never been the brightest student. I was a solid C student and I had never received a detention or had any kind of bad student record. This is important because to this day, I still have no idea why that teacher treated me this way. The teacher, who we will name Mrs. Frank, had been a teacher there for more than a decade and was widely known for being a petty, heartless witch who the administrators saw as the golden child. Mrs. Frank taught algebra, who is my worst subject. So naturally I had issues understanding the lessons. I would ask questions frequently. To some, these questions are easily answered, but to me it was rocket science. Usually when someone asks a dumb question, no one should address it. However, in Mrs. Frank's case, she would belittle me in front of everyone by saying things such as, "And here comes a slow boy again. Wow, surprise, surprise, you don't understand it again. Really? We have to go extra slow for you today, don't we?" And so on. I tried to go to the administration about it before, but again, she was considered the golden child. They would send someone in to examine her during class. She would act respectful and normal for one day and go back to being a witch the next. This went on for about half a year until I had enough. I went to the local Radio Shack, bought a recorder, and secretly recorded every insult she would throw at me. I would sometimes instigate to make up for the lost time. Go ahead, feed the fire. Fast forward to the end of the year and I'm sitting in Mrs. Frank's class when I ask a question. Her response, and I quote because it's burned into my brain, was, "I've been teaching here for over 10 years, and that was the single dumbest question I've ever heard come from anyone's mouth." And she continued the lesson without answering. I calmly stood up, packed up my stuff, and headed to the nurse's office to dismiss myself from school. We were allowed to dismiss ourselves if we were 18. I went home, compiled all of the brutal tapes into one glorious masterpiece, and headed back the next day to show the administrators. I sat down with the principal. We listened to a couple of the insults before he stopped me. He wanted more witnesses present as well as Mrs. Frank. He told me we would meet the next day where I could show him and the rest of the administrators a full tape. I walk into school the next morning being the most nervous I've ever been for anything. I was called down to the office where I met with some board directors, the local school police officer, the principal, the vice principal, and Mrs. Frank. What followed was some of the greatest minutes of my life. I watched as the administrators went from fed up with being in another useless meeting to furious and speechless, with some of them keeping their mouths open for the duration of the tape. I also watched Mrs. Frank go from confident and stuck up to her realizing that she had screwed up beyond repair. She was publicly roasting herself in front of the most important people from the district. The tape ended and without hesitation, the administrators looked around in astonishment and the principal turned to me and said, "I think we have heard everything we need to. Thank you." And I was quietly dismissed from the room. The final time I saw Mrs. Frank was leaving the room. I looked back and we made eye contact through her tear-filled eyes as I gave the biggest, most evil smile. I returned to class the next week and Mrs. Frank was nowhere to be found. The story spread quickly throughout the school and I was seen as a saint. I had successfully gotten her fired and made it almost impossible for Mrs. Frank to return to her teaching career, as well as cut off most of her connections she had with other teachers in the school. I had ruined her financially because no school district in the area would hire this walking piece of garbage. If you're reading this, Mrs. Frank, I'd like to take this moment to tell you to go screw yourself. Edit 1. Should have cleared this up in a story, however, I didn't want to go into much detail about the process. Yes, this was perfectly legal to do, and my parents and I did our research to make sure we weren't breaking any kind of law. In my state, you can record someone in their place of business without both parties' consent. Edit 2. I want to address some frequently asked questions. I regret sharing the dumbed down version because I left out the amount of stuff I put my parents through during all of this. Tons of meetings and phone calls that would have made the story a lot longer, and I didn't think anyone would enjoy reading it. 1. I do not still have the tapes. It was in the administration's best interest to keep them in case she sued for false termination, and it would have gotten out of hand if the tapes spread and gave a bad reputation towards the district. Even if I kept the tapes, this all took place over 15 years ago, and there is no way in hell I would be able to find them. 2. Yes, I took algebra as a senior because again, I wasn't the greatest student to walk those holes, and throughout all my years of school, I had tutoring. I'm sorry if I'm not a genius. And 3. I don't remember what question I asked that pushed me over the limit that day. Next story. The Hospital Security Guard. This story took place in my early 20s in a section of a town in which most of the houses and apartments are rented to college students. It's a fun place to live when you're that age, but I couldn't imagine having to live there now. Anyway, I digress. I don't drive, so I was a frequent walker, and I was frequently on one illicit substance or another. But this particular day, for one reason or another, I was completely sober. Although I was sober, I was in a particularly good mood. I had a little bit of a skip in my step. I was off in my town, head daydreaming about something pleasant. At this point, it is important for me to tell you that I have a nervous tic that is similar to Stevie Wonder's head movement. The tic gets worse under certain circumstances and almost goes away under others. When I'm daydreaming, it goes crazy, also drunk, high, sleepy, or lost in thought. When I'm super focused, the tic goes away almost completely. It is also important to note that I'm unaware of my head movement. My eyes move opposite. So I'm walking near the hospital that sits in the center of this section of town. I'm daydreaming and my nervous tic is likely going crazy. I spot a hospital security car. Looks just like a cop car. Naturally, I snap to attention. My tic likely disappears and the guard goes by, but he clearly goes slow when he sees me. I am nervous, but not for any reason, as I was sober, had no arrest warrants, and wasn't carrying any contraband. A minute or so after the guard's car is out of sight, I calm back down and almost immediately start daydreaming again. Likely tic comes right back. A few minutes later again, I notice the security guard's car, and again likely my tic goes away. The guard pulls over to the side and stops me. At this point, I'm a little more nervous. I don't like dealing with authority, and I'm sure this makes the security guard think I'm up to no good. It turns out he's a cop, off duty perhaps, but a cop still. I did not have my wallet on me, so when he asked to see my ID, I did not have it. He was convinced I was on drugs. Like I say, I've had cops think my nervous tic meant I was on drugs many times, but I've never been on anything when a cop thought I was. He ordered me to sit on the curb while he called the city police for backup. I was an obedient little citizen. I sat quietly, and the guard asked me for my social security number, name and birth date. I gave them to him. He then would read them back to me wrong. I'd correct him. We went through this routine for 10 minutes. Finally, the actual on-duty police officer showed up. This is not a calming thing for me. The cop comes up and talks to the guards and to me. He asks me for my information and I tell him. He asks me what I'm doing and I tell him I was just walking by on my way to a coffee house and I was detained by that guy for no reason. The cop tells me to hold tight and he'll be right back with me. He goes to his car, is there a minute or two, then he comes back and tells me that I can be on my way. As I'm leaving, I hear the two of them talking. The cop basically tells the guy that I hadn't done anything and they had no reason to hold me. I get down to the coffee house, and I'm pissed the heck off by what had happened, so obviously it's what I talk about. My buddies convinced me that I need to do something about this. Now I'm not that litigious type, but I thought I could at least announce my displeasure. I wrote a letter to the hospital administrators. I explained that I was walking on a public sidewalk next to their hospital and was illegally detained by one of their officers based solely upon a documented medical condition. I told him that while I had that sort of thing happen to me previously, I thought that a hospital would be a place where I could count on not being discriminated against based on a medical condition. About a week later, I walked by the same hospital and I saw a said security guard. Did he have a nice security car anymore? No, he didn't. Now he was guarding a parking lot. On the night shift, I will always remember purposefully walking under a bright streetlight, gaining his attention, smiling real big and walking away. On a related note, for the next year or so, I will receive a phone call from a different vice president of the hospital, apologizing and obviously trying to make sure I wasn't interested in suing. I got a call almost once every 3 weeks for the next year. Now I know a lot of you are saying I should have sued, but honestly I knew the hospital dealt with the issue, and that was all I was concerned about. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.